present and for giving me some time to talk. And thank you for all of those people watching live and that are watching it on your YouTube channel or wherever after the fact or on demand. My name is Robert Bailey. Today I'm here to talk about teaching critical digital skills for school success and employability. Just a little bit of background on kind of who I am. There's my beauty shot again. I'm based out of Chicago. If Abraham Lincoln wasn't a good enough giveaway, I'm based in Illinois. I work for a company called Hapara. If you're from, it's originally from New Zealand and it's a Maori word, so it is technically pronounced Hapara. And so I'm trying my best to actually call it by its proper name. But in the US, most of us call it Hapara. I've been in ed tech 17 years now. It's the only industry I've ever known. I've spent time in the K-12 side of things. Then I was in the employment training side of things, and then back into the K-12 side of things for like the last 7 years or so now. I've also been a debate coach, public speaking coach for about 10 years. I've interacted with students, and I love education. And so, you know, being able to make sure that we have that opportunity to impact students is my passion. And so I've got this kind of unique one foot in the education world and one foot in the business world. And so being able to talk about employability and how we can best prepare children for the future is where my passion lays. So I appreciate Matt for giving me the time to be able to come and talk about that. As Matt said, I love questions. I love interaction. So if you've got questions, if you've got thoughts, if you've got feedback or responses, please feel free to jump in the chat and write those down. It's, you know, no one ever likes watching just someone sit and talk the entire time. So as much as we can have a discussion, that would be great. In doing some research and, you know, in preparing and everything, there's a bit of a war going on right now about how many employment skills there really are. Some people say 7, some people say 10. I think we've settled on about 8 right now that are kind of the key critical employment skills. There's a link, and we're going to send out the PowerPoint after the presentation, so I encourage you to take a look at it. It's an employability skills framework. It was done in Australia. It's a really good resource that goes through these eight skills, the subset of them. And there's a worksheet that students can do too, specifically kind of the junior, senior type high school students, where they talk about rating their abilities within those skills. So for those people that are looking specifically at some employment pieces with students, it's a really good resource that I highly recommend. As we look at these 8 different pieces, you know, I think that there's a lot of them that we do a really good job in education. It doesn't matter what state you're in, if it's Common Core, whatever the curriculum is, looking at addressing. So things like communication, things like teamwork, things like problem solving, and showing initiative are inherently embedded in the framework of our curriculum in a lot of ways. What I want to talk about, though, is specifically a couple of different pieces. Because of the company that I work for and some of our experience, we have kind of some firsthand information on this. And I want to talk about some practical skills in the classroom that may be able to help better foster these skills with your students. And so the 2 that we're going to take a look at is self-management and technology. You know, with COVID happening, the whole world got flipped upside down. You know, districts that were partially one-to-one went almost immediately to entirely one-to-one. We have devices in the classroom. We're now back in the classroom. And this kind of, you know, I don't think we'll ever again in our lifetime see a period of such rapid change in the education industry. I used to have this slide that I would put up, and it was a picture of a classroom from like 1905, and then a picture of the classroom in 2005. And not a lot had changed, right? All the desks were still facing the blackboard, and for the most part, the classroom didn't evolve for about 100 years. We started to see some change. Technology obviously started to prompt some of that change, but COVID in a lot of ways was that catalyst for rapid growth. And for better or for worse, you know, we're all doing our best now to try and keep up with this new world that we have, which is, you know, education in 2022. So, you know, taking a look at self-management and technology, just out of curiosity, and we're gonna throw a poll up here. Just curious, how many of you currently use a classroom management solution? So something like a Hapara, a GoGuardian, a Lightspeed, something that allows you to see what students are doing on their devices. Excellent. Thank you so much. So what a classroom management solution does is it gives you oversight, right? Because when we went to one-to-one, the biggest concern or fear for most teachers was that fear of loss of control. Everyone's got their own device now. They can go anywhere on the internet. How do I know what they're doing? How do I know if they're still, if they're paying attention to me? When it was a textbook, I could quickly, you're taught, scan the room and see whether or not everyone's on page 95. I can't do that when I'm staring at the back of a bunch of Chromebooks. So companies like Hapara, which is the one that I work for, GoGuardian, Lightspeed, Securely, came out with solutions which give teachers visibility into what those students are doing. So it allows you to see all of the tabs that students have open. It allows you to send out links to students and focus them in on specific activities. But it's also caused some challenges along the way. And it's interesting in how we move past these challenges to develop some of these employability skills, while at the same time still maintaining control over the classroom. So one of the things that we talk about a lot about is this like evolution of monitoring. So for those of you that have a classroom tool that allows you to see the activity, I always like to say, where do you lay on the spectrum of evolution of monitoring, and then where do you want to get to, right? And so it starts with that lockdown learning environment. I'm going to send you 2 links. Those are the only links that you're allowed to go to. Moves on to like handheld structured learning, which is, I'm going to sit behind a computer. I'm going to watch what you're doing. You better not be on sites that you shouldn't be. I'm going to close those tabs out if you are, and I'm going to drive the learning as much as possible. It moves to kind of semi-independent and independent learning, which is, okay, here's the topic we're working on this class. I want you to do research on these specific areas. And maybe you check in, maybe you stand at the back of the classroom and scan the screens from time to time, but you're not actively monitoring what the students are doing. And this behavior directly talks and is part of developing that self-control within students, because when they have a device, there are so many distractions, as we know, as educators, that they can go and do. And, the funny thing is that as educators, we want students to be, fully paying attention to whatever we're talking about, not having multiple tabs open, not doing different things. But for us, it's that kind of say as I do, do as I say, not as I do. Which is like, for the people that are participating in this right now, or even those people that are watching the recording of this webinar, there's a good chance you've got 5, 6 tabs open that you flip between your email and this webinar and maybe something else, because we naturally now have a number of different things on the go. But when it comes to technology and when it comes to students, our expectation is that can't possibly happen, or that we can't possibly learn under those scenarios. And so a lot of what this is trying to drive the behavior of the teacher, which then in turn drives the behavior of the student, and trying to change the way we look at the computer, trying to change the way we look at the internet. And as hard as it is, trusting students to be on it in a non-controlled environment. So what we call it at Hapara is teachers sitting behind a computer playing like whack-a-mole, right? Which is a student has a tab open that they shouldn't have, they close that tab, and trying to basically catch the students that are doing something wrong. And it's very much it's very negative in a lot of ways, right? You're catching them, you're policing them, as opposed to what we typically want to do as a teacher, which is lift our students up, which is encourage our students, that positive feedback loop. But these tools have been constructed in a lot of ways in a way that doesn't foster that skill that you want to be teaching, which is, self-control, motivation, and the ability to use technology. Absolutely. And the hard thing too is the only way that you can see that they are doing something that they shouldn't be doing is by sitting behind the computer yourself. which means that you're not doing all of the things that, we learned when we went into education, which is moving around the classroom and interacting with students and doing all of those pieces. So it's like this conundrum. How do I control the classroom, and how do I, maintain a sense of order? But at the same time, how do I also go through what I know to be best practice? And so when we sat down at Hapara and originally put the tool together, we looked at John Hattie's research in terms of the different levers that you can pull, and and that's kind of how we tried to design it backwards. And so you don't have to be using Hapara. If you're using Lightspeed or GoGuardian or any of them, some of these tricks are going to work for you. And so the number one that we like to teach all of our teachers who have started using our tool is, if you've got a projector in the classroom, take your classroom management tool and project it. Because students will monitor each other and rat each other out faster than the teacher ever can. And in most cases, if the student knows what you can see, they're going to stay on task. So that's one way of teaching a student to self-monitor themselves, is just to project it. And if I'm on Amazon shopping for sneakers when I should be doing my research project, someone's going to quickly and easily be like, "Oh, look, Robert's online buying Jordans right now." And so that it's so small and so insignificant, but if you project it for the first 2-3 weeks of class, students know that you have access to that information. You don't have to sit behind your computer anymore. And for the most part, they will continue to self-regulate themselves as throughout the year. And that's the goal. The goal at the end of the day for you with any of these tools should be closing fewer tabs at the end of the year than you did at the start of the year. And so, as the pandemic for ed tech companies too was really interesting, because it allowed us time to, instead of being at conferences and shows, to actually sit down and kind of look at how the tools are being used, and to talk to teachers and to talk to students. And so one of the things that we started doing at Hapara is we started actually going to the students and talking to them. Because it's no secret, students don't like monitoring tools. They don't like any sort of thing that where they know the teacher has access to that information, because it means they don't get to play games and they don't get to do these certain things. But at the same time, it's fascinating to have conversations with students, because they understand why you have them. They understand the skills that you are trying to develop. So Matt, question for you, just because I'm curious if you know what it is. We actually sat down with several students in a focus group all across the country. And we said to them, it's really weird. Your teacher keeps closing, a tab on you, be it Minecraft or be it, Spotify or whatever it was. Why do you keep reopening that tab and going back to it? And do you know what the number one answer was?
I'm going to guess and say it's more fun.
That's going in. That's kind of
really
what we fully expected students to come across and say, well, I wanted to be on the site, or I was hoping they wouldn't notice. And the number one answer by students was they didn't know why the tab disappeared. They thought that they hit Command W. They thought that they accidentally closed it out. And so, take it for what it's worth. Even if 2 of the 3 students are spot on with that, with maybe one just giving lip service to the situation. But for us, it was like this light bulb moment, right? Which is, in education, you're supposed to have a feedback loop. You always have to have a feedback loop. And with all of these tools, tabs are disappearing and there's no feedback loop. There's nothing to say, that looks like a lot of fun, but that's not what we're doing right now. Or, hopefully you can get back on task, or this is entirely what you're not supposed to be doing right now. There was no feedback loop to say, Mr. Bailey closed this tab because it just disappeared. And so what we did is we actually enabled, when you close the tab, to give a reason why the tab closed. And for those that have actually enabled it, it's amazing. The number of tabs closed has gone down by 50%.
Really?
So, yeah, 50%. Just by telling the student why you close the tab out. And it seems so basic, right? But it's not. And we actually made the choice as a company at the start of the year to force it and push it for everybody. So you, as a teacher, you can't close a tab now without giving a reason why. Because, we think that part of our role is ensuring best practice. And so, we want our tool to be used a certain way, because used the wrong way, a tool can be destructive. And we've had some very interesting pushback by teachers. They don't all like it. That extra click and that sort of thing has been frustrating for them. But again, if you look at the data, behavior is changing. So yeah, no, it's a great question that you just put in the chat there, which is like, for those people that are using those kind of tools, what's your thought? Because it is an extra click. But what we have found is that we've almost gamified the closing of tabs for students. We call it whack-a-mole at Hapara, which is, it's kind of fun. It's like, you're catching them, and and they just keep popping back up, and you just keep closing them out. But what skill are we actually teaching our students here?
Right.
We're not, right? We're policing. We're not teaching a viable skill. And when, and that's why this topic is so important, which is like, how as a student do I learn self-control? Because I'm going to need that when I get out into the workforce. And not only that, I'm going to need that when I get out into the hallway and I pull out my cell phone. And I'm going to need that at home when I'm at home trying to do my homework or working on, working on the internet at home. So it's having these conversations with students, which is, the internet is this incredibly distracting world. So how do I help you learn to focus? And that's what we kind of call the gradual release of responsibility. And it's another technique that you can use with your classroom management tool, which is, as opposed to saying, okay, here's the entire internet. Now I'll whack you on the head when you're not doing what you should be doing. To start students off, and especially at the middle school. So in September, to start them by saying, here, you can go to 5 websites and just lock them down into that environment. It's a very controlled environment. And then as they develop the skills, as you develop trust with them, as you've talked through some of those different pieces, starting to release that. So you start to add more sites. Then you go and you say, okay, now you can go anywhere, but I am going to filter these sites that you've identified that are distracting, right? So I'm going to filter out some of the game sites. I'm going to filter out some of the music sites and the social media sites. And then in time, getting more to that open learning environment, which is just saying, okay, now I'm going to let you go anywhere. And, at the end of the day, if you're off task, I'm going to know. We can have a conversation about it at the end of the class. I don't want to have to move you back into that more lockdown environment. And so you're building that rapport with students, and you're building that trust with students. And so one of the things that we've done, and for anyone watching this webinar, my contact information is at the end. If you send me an email, I will send you a package of these cards. We've got, that's what the box looks like. And I'll send them out. We've got conversation starters for educators and conversation starters for learners. And so the educator ones are great when it comes to, staff meetings, being able to have conversations with teachers, starting a staff meeting out with a provocative questions, like how do we hold students, or do we hold students to a different standard of behavior online than we do ourselves, and why? And being able to have a discussion around that. So we can start talking about digital citizenship. And then there's cards for the students as well. And so these are great for teachers as you look at that gradual release of responsibility. It's something that, that you need to have you need to have the conversation with students. So having that little 5 minutes at the start of class or 5 minutes at the end of class, where it's, have you ever Googled your name? What does your digital footprint look like? Those different pieces, they're critical skills for students, not only when they get out into the workforce, but immediately for students when they're at home, when they're in the hallways, even when they're in class. And so, it's a way of looking at it as opposed to saying, I'm going to police the bad behavior. It's, I'm going to work with you on developing the right behavior. And so the way we're going to do that is through positive conversations, where we're going to start you out more locked down. And we're going to gradually release you as the year goes on, so that you can know that I have that trust in yourself, in you, but also that you have the trust in yourself to be able to do that. And then it's just some little things like giving students some time to be able to do research, giving students some time to be able to be distracted and to do the things that they want to do, because it's just the nature of what the internet is now, right? And if you've got the devices, they've got to learn, they've got to in time learn those skills. So another one of my favorites is that we get teachers to do is, not all filtering and not all focusing has to be bad. And so one of the ones that we love to get teachers to do is during research projects to filter out Wikipedia. Because Wikipedia is a great, as weird as it is, Wikipedia has become a great resource over time. It came of age while I was in, high school and then into university. And at first it got a lot of grief due to accuracy. It's actually fairly accurate now, they're finding out. But what students do is, as we know, because I did it, and I'm sure other people have done it at times, is you go to Wikipedia, and then you go and you look up in the bio all of the different credited, all of the different references that are used, and you reference hunt a Wikipedia page. And so it makes doing a research project really easy, and it makes for the students building out their biography really easy. So what we do sometimes is we say, okay, we want you to do we want you to research whatever the topic is. So maybe it's on digital citizenship. We want you to research what digital citizenship is and cite a resource. But I'm going to filter out Wikipedia because I want you to be able to develop those other skills. I want you to be able to use Google Scholar. I want you to be able to go and find those credible sites. And then it gives you that opportunity to talk about, like, what is a credible news site? How do we know if something's fake news or if it's not fake news? How do we know who to trust and who not to trust on the internet? And it's tough because I don't think we all know the answer to those necessarily, but that's an important conversation to have with the students too, right? Which is, we struggle with that at times, is figuring out exactly what those pieces are. So a lot of it is, it's when we talk about digital citizenship, when we talk about, building trust and impulse control and these different things, it's not so much how we specifically have like a curriculum designed around it, or that specific lecture that we're going to give or topic that we're going to talk about in class that one day. It's about the behavior of us as educators in the classroom with our students. And students know when we don't trust them. Like, they know. And they know the teachers that do trust them. They know the teachers that don't trust them. They know the ones that are comfortable with technology. They're very aware of the ones that are not comfortable with technology. And for educators, that's very scary, right? Because students know more than I do. What if they're getting around things? What if they're using a VPN? How, am I going to get in trouble? It's all of this fear. And so, it's always interesting for me to talk to educators to find out, like, how do we mitigate that fear? And how do we learn to kind of operate within the fear? And Matt, you and I were talking about this earlier. For some, our immediate reaction when we're uncomfortable with something is to go to the extreme, right? And to then absolutely kind of just police or try and control behavior within the classroom. But everything that we know about education says that's not the way that we should be doing it, but it's the way that we naturally do. It requires you being very, very confident in your own teaching abilities, very confident in your own ability to use technology, and then trusting to whatever extent you can the students that you have in the classroom. And so, I think that's the other thing it's important to remember. And we were talking about it earlier because we were talking about how, when we get together, is like my business, when we get together, when you get together with your staff, devices are everywhere. We're on our phones, we're on our computers, we're trying to have conversations. And it's okay to say, put them away. It's okay to say, we're gonna take 45 minutes and have a really focused discussion here. And as adults, sometimes we need that as well. But what we sometimes do in school is we say, you put those devices away from 8:30 to 5, like, you're just not allowed to touch them. You're not allowed to see anything. And as adults, if we got told that one day, we would scream, right? Because they've become a part of our lives. That constant communication is now just a part of who we are. And for better or for worse, we can constantly communicate with loved ones at home, with friends, with other people. And so even more so for kids, the students don't know another world other than that constant communication world. So, to come in and just blanketly say, no, we're not going to use this, or to come in and say, You can use it, but I'm going to completely control what you're able to use, even though, the second you step out of this classroom, you can do whatever you want. It's confusing for students. It's setting up a structure that doesn't necessarily fit with kind of what the current world looks like. And I think that's a great point. And I think that's the other thing too is that and this is more on the technology side, but we got to make sure that the internet filters that we've got at the school district level are doing their jobs. Teachers are not a substitute for a bad filter, right? And it's things like games, things like sites that students shouldn't be on. There are tools that enable districts to make sure that those sites never come up for students, or that they're heavily regulated for students. And I think that sometimes we've put the onus of that on the teacher, and that's where teachers become highly uncomfortable in the classroom, or like, what if the student pulls up a picture that they shouldn't, or some of these things. And I think that in large part is a failure of technology at the district level as well, because that's not a fair onus to put on the teacher. The teacher should expect that that students are going to be safe, and we've got specific laws in place that mandate that we have adequate solutions at the school district level for those types of activities. If you guys have questions or thoughts or feedback, I would love to have more of an open discussion. We recently started, I've recently started, and it's shameless plug on this one, started a podcast, and it's called #Student Voice. So if you just Google #Student Voice podcast, you'll come across it. And so what I've started doing, and what we've started doing at Hapara, is interviewing students. And as difficult as it is for me, my job is to interview them and to not talk and just let them talk. And so what we've done is we've invited students to come and talk about whatever topic they've got on their mind, whatever they want teachers to be able to hear. And so it's fascinating. And so we've got a couple episodes out so far. We've got about 6 more that have been recorded that are ready to come out. Did 2 from the ISTE floor, one of which was with, it's our inaugural episode. It's with 2 students who were part of a secure school in New Orleans, so a jail school. And so really interesting kind of getting their perspective just on a lot of these different issues on self-control, on self-management, on learning. That episode in a lot of ways was incredibly enlightening and heartbreaking at the same time. The second episode is with a dancer actor out of Ohio, talking about how, it's not about necessarily teaching the arts in school and having those specific classes, because we know that they get cut by the budget, they get budget cuts. But for her, it's things like, if in history, when we're learning about the 20s, if I could learn about, the ballet that was taking place in the 20s and how it was impacted by the history of what was going on in the region and everything, that for me has tied my own interest into whatever the topic is. So she's a freshman in high school. It was, it's like, okay, well, so kids have these incredible ideas. So, well, I've got kind of a few of you guys, make sure to check it out. It's, as an education technology company, we realized we do a lot of listening to teachers, a lot of listening to district administrators, and a ton of listening to parents. But sometimes we forget to actually talk to the students, who are the ones who actually are the ones impacted by these solutions. Stace, we do have a comment here, and students are directed to only use phones in the halls while passing and at lunch or in class. If a teacher says to use their phones, I'm in the library and we permit students to use cell phones. Only requirement is headphones be used if they're accessing items with sound. I really like that a lot. It's, I think that that's a great way of handling kind of device usage. You're not pretending like these devices don't exist. It used to be, if we see a cell phone, we're going to take it away. I know about 10 years ago, and it's evolved since then. I had my cell phone taken away for more than once when I was in school, and back in the day where you had to like text by 2222, 3333, kids will never understand these days how difficult it was to send a message. But I think that's a really good way of looking at it. I was curious, Stacy, if you do have any feedback on it. One of the things that I've heard from schools is with headphones, they find that it disconnects students a lot of the times from kind of everything else that's happening, right? It's nice because you don't have the noise of the phone, and it keeps the student quiet sometimes, but it's also, you end up in, students end up in these silos as opposed to like working together, communicating together, building some of those teamwork pieces. So I'm not sure if you run into any of that, or if for the most part, I guess you're not talking in libraries anyway. So it's one of those things probably that helps keep them.
All right, I have to unmute for that because no, that's absolutely false. You talk in libraries all the time. Very, very common misconception. I would say that this is my first year in the high school, but the directive is they're not supposed to be wearing, ears are supposed to be visible. So the times when they're using headphones is when they're, sitting, doing something, either free time or whatever, it's just so that they're not disturbing other people.
That's great.
But in general, no, they're not supposed to be walking around with their headphones. Do they? Sure, but they're not supposed to.
And in the library, Stacy, do you guys, how do you, keep kids on task? Do you have anything where you like monitor student activity, or are you just walking around and being a resource for help? How do you approach that?
Honestly, at the high school level, it's not as much managing them because really the expectation is they're managing themselves. And so far I found that to be true, at least with our, the school that I'm in. I kind of I have that spidey sense. So I know, when you see them like looking up every 5 seconds to see where I'm at, then I know I should probably wander over. But other than that, but generally, if they're in the library, they're working independently. If they're there with the class, the teacher's also there. So it's more just a support role at that point.
If we don't have too much more discussion type pieces, as we kind of look at wrapping the conversation, I think that the big message that I hope that as a community we can work on is a couple of things. It's one, it's having more conversations with students when it comes to technology and when it comes to how they're using technology. And I know that in the moment, that's so difficult because we've got 20 some odd students, and we've got a lesson that we're trying to do, and we've got activities that we want to do, and we've got all of these pieces. But it's that skill that is critically important to students once they get outside of school, right? I know that in the moment we think that thing that we're trying to teach them in English or that math lesson is critical, but that ability to use technology the right way, that ability to know how to approach technology, that ability to be able to multitask within it, to be able to self-identify when you're distracted and figure out skills and techniques for not being distracted. How do I close certain things down? Do I put music on because that helps me focus in this particular instance? Working with students and having those conversations to be able to figure those key pieces out is one of the most important things I think that we can do for students as they enter and exit high school and go on to college or go on to the workforce. We were having this Matt, you and I were talking about this right before we jumped in. And I was saying that my college astronomy professor sat us all down one day and he said, do you know how to use Adobe? We answered, like some people put their hand up, yes. And some people said, no. Do you know how to use Excel? Some people said yes. Some people said no. And he looked around, he said, when you go and you look for your first job, he said, you all know how to use all of those tools. And he said, you have the internet, you have YouTube, you have the ability to learn anything. He said, you're going to have a weekend. You can learn it before you have to get to the job. He said, so don't let technology stand in your way of where you want to go. And I think that that's kind of that life lesson that I hope we can leave students with is there's so much capacity for you to be able to learn. There's so much capacity for you to be able to go and do all of these different things. But it's a huge challenge. It's a huge distraction. And so we're in a bit of an impossible situation, but it's I think at the end of the day, it's how do we move and shift that continuum of behavior. And I think it starts day one with what your expectation is. And I think it's completely okay to say, for the first little while, we're going to be working in a lockdown environment because we're going to build that skill. We're going to learn how to focus in on an assignment and gradually release that responsibility. I think it is very difficult to put a student in and be like, okay, go and do whatever you want, be independent learners, when they haven't built those skills in the first place. So, for the most part, you all have classroom management solutions. You all have the ability to see what students are doing. I would encourage you to look at how you use the tool, not the functionality of the tool, because the tool can be used not in the way not in an educationally sound way necessarily. It can be used in a way that is very much just about, it empowers you to be the police officer of the internet. And to date, I have not met a single teacher who went through the process of becoming a teacher and the headache and grief of being a teacher to be the internet police. Everyone has more, better reasons or more idealistic reasons than wanting to just watch what kids do on the internet. So the way we move past that, the way we get back to enjoying the pieces that we like, which is the getting up in the classroom and walking around and encouraging discussion and encouraging cooperation with our students, is by helping them understand how to use use the internet in a responsible way, and then learning how to trust that, that sure, they're not always going to be in the right places, but it doesn't mean that they're not learning. It doesn't mean that they're not working, and it doesn't mean that that's not a behavior that we can't correct. So I just want to thank everybody for giving me the opportunity to coming and listening, and for Matt, thank you so much for having me, and it's been a pleasure to be able to sit down and talk with you guys.